Aero GPX is the type of game that busts you down sexual style and leaves you covered in suspiciously viscous fluids while you lay there in a state of euphoria only matched by doing copious amounts of booger sugar off of Rhea Ripley's meat grinder abs, or whatever you freaks get up to in 2024. Hi, it's me. I'm Freaks.
Hey yo, what the fuck?
This game is what F-Zero could have been if Nintendo didn't take the series out to the woods to have a long talk about some rabbits. The reason Nintendo never brought a brand new F-Zero game to the table is because they stated they had no new ideas after F-Zero GX, which to be fair is not only the peak of this series, but objectively the best racing game ever made, and if you disagree, you're wrong. No racing game has ever grazed the titanium-plated nutsack of GX, until Aero GPX. I've been following this game's development for a while now on Twitter. I so happened to stumble across it while scrolling through my timeline, and I can only describe this moment as divine intervention, because at the time, and even now, my timeline is full of, well, let's just say it's down dastardly. I've been there for every little update until recently when it was announced to be out on Steam Early Access, and I had to stop mid-line to go buy the game. When I tell you that I went into debt to buy this game day one, you might think it an exaggeration. Then I remind you that if your meat computer raises in temperature, you hallucinate that you actually get maidens. So take with that information what you will. Aero GPX is a futuristic zero-gravity racing game with absurd speed both on the ground and in the air, a focus on track memorization, resource management, and some element of vehicular combat. Admittedly, the concept itself isn't exactly the most unique, but it's in the execution of it where this game takes the winding stairway leading up to F-Zero's spit-shine scrote. Every attempt to copy and capitalize on F-Zero's sheer aura have failed so badly that it makes the many scuffed attempts at Fidel Castro's life look like a success story. Since this game is a spiritual successor to the late and great F-Zero series, I want to take an elbow deep dive into how it stacks up to its masterpiece of an inspiration, and if it can potentially surpass it when it fully releases. Visually, it apes F-Zero X, the one on that console that had the third leg on the controller, but in a modernized and refined cel-shaded style, instead of going the route of GX's more air quotes realistic styling. And despite the speeds that you can reach in this game, it's so well optimized that my dog water mid-range laptop can run it without heating up to the temperature of the literal sun. Your grandparents' 40-year-old Dyson vacuum that can somehow still suck the molecules off the carpet could run this game at 4K with a steady 60 FPS. To be fair, I wouldn't have been mad if it went with the GX style either, since even now the graphics hold up well, or at least what you can see going above the speed of sound at any given moment. The machine's colors, effects, track backdrops, and even the lighting all go so fucking hard, even at double or triple the speeds that you can go in GX, at least without doing the inhuman maneuvers of GX speedrunners, which is some of the most entertaining stuff you'll see in any racing game speedrun. This praise of the style also applies to the UI and character portraits. The UI is sleek and fully readable to perfection, only taking up as much space as it needs to at any given moment. The character portraits are immaculate, conveying a certain vibe with each character that always matches the machines that they drive and how they handle. I hope that at some point we could get the backstories of these characters, because if I'm a glutton for anything, it's interesting lore. And big throbbing shafts.
What? What the fuck?
The only nitpick I can muster is that the tracks themselves, as in the literal roads and pipes you travel on, aren't particularly detailed and look quite samey between the tracks. But again, this is more of an X style where the tracks are more or less flat colors folded in 3D space to make all the crazy track layouts with PNGs for the background. And again, you're blasting through the tracks at mind-warping speeds, so it's not even really an issue at the end of the day. Fact of the matter is, the layouts of the tracks are what matters most in these games. Speaking of track layouts, all of them are expertly made, from the simple figure 8 to what I can only describe as the highway to hell. They provide a solid challenge as you go up in the Grand Prix tiers. However, for someone who's an F-Zero veteran like myself, I could get through these tracks in one piece. Most of the time. In GX, it feels like the tracks, even in the first cup, are actively going out of their way to put you in the dirt and then take a Cleveland steamer on your grave, if you took them lightly, or if you don't have a functioning frontal lobe. The same applies here, with the first and second cups having a fire-filled equivalent that can, and in fact will, want your severed head on a pike if you try to be all fancy with it with your first time through. If anything, the difficulty curve in Aero is much steeper than in X or GX. Most of the time, the first cups in those games don't have any tracks that will have a method of instantly blowing you and your machine to smithereens, or if there is a chance of you doing it, it's minimal unless you go out of your way to take a shortcut or something like that. In Aero's first cup, you're already facing deadly jumps in parts of the tracks without any railings to speak of, and it only gets harder from there. Given this game is most likely going to attract the F-Zero X and GX fans that have probably put a sizable amount of hours into both of those games, starting off more difficult makes a little bit of sense. Each cup will put you in ever-increasing peril, with less railings and healing pads, while providing more hazards like fire that will slowly drain the health of your machine over time, but give you a stab boost if you're in the final burn state, and jumps that, while beneficial as shortcuts, can also end your race with an instant cremation. But hey, at least your family doesn't have to pay for that service, right? Assuming they can pick your ashes out of the mangled burnt mess of your machine or lake of magma. While the first two cups, even on higher difficulties, are manageable, especially if you're an actual F-Zero fan, the last cup will shove it in you without any lube, and it won't stop until you're
used up, a gaping and vibrating furiously on the floor.
Bro, what are you talking about, man?
Slant City in particular is a track in the middle of the last cup that looks so simple on the surface, but in actuality provides you with absolutely no healing pads and sharp corners that will dick you down if you don't take them the right way. But that's not even the worst part. It's the other machines. See, I played on the hardest enemy racer difficulty, since really that's the only difficulty that will provide a decent enough challenge to someone who's beaten every cup in GX on master difficulty. But the problem with that on the specific track is that they not only keep up with you, but will not hesitate to slam into you with a side attack, spin attack, or bumping you forward into a wall, all of which taking absolute chunks out of your machine's health depending on its body stat. On my first playthrough of this cup, I got absolutely creamed on the track an absurd number of times. If you don't keep up, you'll lose the race and probably the entire cup if you aren't getting first in every race before and after. But if you do keep up, the AI will vibe check you into a forever box on literally every corner. The saving grace is that unlike F-Zero that always used a spare machines or live system where you have a limited number of retries before you start back at the beginning, you have an infinite number of tries in Aero, allowing you to slam your head into the brick wall until you Kool-Aid Man your way through it. And considering I'm a FromSoft fan, this was right up my alley. Honestly, I don't think this track could have worked in F-Zero because of the limited number of retries, but here it works well as an absolute brick wall that both newbies to this type of game and veterans will have to break through. I look forward to seeing how hard any new tracks will get in the full release of the game. I want him to get even crazier with it. Beat my soft, supple cranium with your brick walls. I don't think I'll be denying any of those masochist allegations anytime soon. Since I've already mentioned a few of the gameplay mechanics so far, I want to point out where it's similar and completely different to a spiritual predecessor. The gameplay in its simplest form will feel right at home to F-Zero fans. You got drifting, boosting, strafing, various attack methods, health management, and so on. Where Aero splits off is that the boost gauge and your health are separated. In F-Zero X and GX, you sacrifice health in order to gain a crazy boost in speed at any time after the first lap, but not here. You think that it would make things easier, right? How wrong you are. The machines, or at least the ones I mainly use in this game, which were machines with a high top speed but a low body stat, feel far more fragile than an F-Zero since you aren't using that health as a boosting resource. Now every hit you tank will take years off your lifespan. That's not all though. The tracks frequently have both health pads and pads to refill your boost gauge, but on most tracks they are never positioned in places where you can easily fill up on both. So if you find yourself low on health with no boost, you have to make the hard decision in the couple of seconds you have in these areas, whether to fill up your health and maybe some boost, which is vital to keeping ahead or catching up to the other racers, or get your boost back at the cost of leaving you more vulnerable to the frequent vibe checks the AI will send your way, or fill up a little on both and be 50 shades of fucked either way. While Aero is different in the resource management of the spectrum, the machines themselves stay close to their inspiration with one exception I'll mention. The machines available in this version of the game all handle drastically different, their stats being clearly shown on the select screen with meters instead of simple letter gradings, which in GX were actually inaccurate most of the time. The main difference here is that you cannot tweak the weight between acceleration and top speed, every vehicle having set values all the way around. Some of the machines are better at outspeeding the competition, some better at sliding and quartering without speed loss, some are better at hip checking other machines into the nearest cemetery, and others having their specialty in flight. Flying was something that wasn't really something you could do in the F-Zero games without some exploits, and even then, it was still temporary. If you're in the air, you're always falling towards the track, or wherever the center of gravity is. In Aero, it is similar for the most part, where you're almost glued to the orientation of the track, with the exception of specific sections of some tracks where you're in a wind current. In these currents, your machine will handle more like a plane and soar through the air, giving you complete control over the X and Y positioning, and usually giving you the opportunity, if utilized correctly, to perform a new aerial move, the drill dive. This maneuver is fucking sick. You take the nagging advice of Pepe Hair to the extreme, rotating your machine at Mach Jesus while you're airborne and getting a fuck ton of speed on the way back down to the track. This can be used at any time while you're in the air, even off ramps and long enough drops. It hampers your midair control, and it can't be used while in the aforementioned currents though, since it's like being on the track. So the trick is to strategically pop out of the current with enough speed to get enough height to do a barrel roll that would make Pepe cream his jorts. You can get a smooth landing by letting go of the button right before you land back on the track or in the wind current, getting a small burst of speed in the process, adding just that little bit of extra reward to counterbalance the risk of sending yourself into a wall at 3,000 kilometers per hour or off the track gooch first into a sarlacc pit or something. Another new mechanic is hyper sliding. You hold down the boost button while turning and your machine will damn near turn 90 degrees while still going the direction you intended on traveling in, giving a more powerful slide that could take take sharper corners at crazy speeds. I'd imagine it's inspired by the sliding in F-Zero X, where with lighter vehicles with the slider all the way to the acceleration stat, strafing in the opposite direction you were turning would cause a loss in grip and send your machine sideways, allowing the power of the strafe to careen you forward at a rate faster than your machine would achieve under its own acceleration. I'm pretty sure this was an unintended mechanic quirk of the mechanics of that game, so it's nice to see it return in this game as an actual ability that every single machine can use, even if it's only most usable on the machines that are built for sliding. Another thing this game does different from F-Zero is the career mode, which is that of a linear 10-mission story that hosts some of the greatest cutscenes known to man.
This time, the prize will be mine.
I'll take your entire stock!
Aero goes for a mission structure that minimizes story for more of that gameplay we all know and love. The missions range from simple free choice races to time trials to mass murder. It uses the same tracks in the Grand Prix for these missions, and each set of missions ends with said Grand Prix to move on to the next set of missions. These missions are also how you unlock the new machines, and along with that you gain tokens that are most likely going to be used for the extras and unlocks menu that will be available in a later update. That's all of the major differences when comparing the two games. Since one is the inspiration of the other, it makes sense that it wouldn't deviate too far from the winning formula, lest it end up veering off into the doogie decorated toilet like the original Lords of the Fallen. God, that game was a fucking fever dream. Anyways, the soundtrack fucking bangs. This soundtrack has a heavy use of guitars, synths, and drums, and since I'm a bona fide metalhead from birth, I love every single track in this game. Each track has music accompanying it that always perfectly fits the aesthetic of the course itself, and even after my very first run through of the Grand Prix, I find myself having quite a few of these songs playing on loop for hours through my head, until I was diagnosed clinically insane from how much I was humming them. There is not a single miss in any of these songs. If you're not a fan of rock or synth heavy tunes, you probably won't like the soundtrack as much, but at that point you probably weren't even a fan of F-Zero in the first place, because X and GX take a similar approach to their soundtracks, and GX in particular is home to the absolute heaviest song in this series. Deadass, if I play this song while I'm driving, I literally can't drive below 100 miles per hour. The universe literally won't let me. Now here comes the hard part. Does Aero's soundtrack stack up to X or GX's soundtrack? No. But let me explain. The problem with comparing the two soundtrack-wise is that F-Zero has a whole series of nothing but bangers, while Aero only has a handful in comparison. And even if they are all bangers, it still can't really stack up to F-Zero as a whole. But it has the potential, and that's what counts in the end. Since we're on the topic of auditory fellatio, I might as well go over the sound effects of the game, which feel pretty solid in every way except for one teeny tiny atom-sized thing. While stuff like boosting, colliding with other vehicles and walls, and even the menu sounds are punchy and satisfying to the ear holes, the engine sounds are essentially not even there. It's barely audible over the other sounds that hog the soundscape, and don't have any variety between the vehicles, unlike in GX, which had some variety in both engine and boosting sounds between the machines. Can't really fault the game too much, since I'm pretty sure it's made by mostly one guy, and it's still in early access, so that is likely to change. And even if it doesn't change, it doesn't bother me enough for me to even think about it 99.9% of the time. I'd just take the engine whines being bumped up a little in volume, inside and outside of boosting, just to make it feel like I'm handling a machine that can go nearly triple the speed of sound, and at every point wants to rid me of my mortal meat suit. Well, now that we've gone over pretty much everything the game has to offer so far, I want to get into literally the only criticism I have about the game. And it might not even be the game's fault in all reality, since I'm not on a gaming PC that can calculate quantum equations. When the game has slowdown, it seems to cause a shit ton of errors when it comes to the camera and the handling of the vehicles. If the frame rate drops below a certain point, the camera will freak out and start flipping around the vehicle, causing you to lose your positioning on the track, and this also extends to the controls, where they are so delayed and hitched that it's impossible to keep a straight line. These two issues combined meant that if the game had a lag spike, it was literally impossible to play through it. But then I realized. I started tinkering with my PC settings for a while, and I found out that I had all of my hardware settings set to power saver, limiting my overall performance heavily. Man, it's a miracle that I ever graduated high school with my brain operating on McDonald's Wi-Fi. All that being said, this game is all around perfect, and I cannot wait for what Aaron has in store for the future, whether it be DLC after the game's finished, or even features lost to time like track and machine creators. I could say more, but it would all be moot, as it's clear that Aero GPX fully stacks up to its spiritual predecessor. It is, in fact, the new F-Zero game I've always dreamt of, and you should buy it. Buy it now and experience a climax that no man, silicon silo, or rose toy could make you achieve.